Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Dan Cave and welcome to part 5 of the Tamiya 12 scale Suzuki GSX-RR video build series. So, part 5 is finally here. Funnily enough, that's come directly after part 4. Who would have thought that? Is going to cover the exhaust, radiator, front end, front forks, stuff like that. So part 4 covered the swing arm. Part 3 went back to engine and frame. Part 2 was clear decals and clear coat. Part 1 was kind of prep and paint. So part 5 is going to cover the exhaust, radiator and front end assembly. So we'll basically, by the end of this part, we'll basically have a bike on 2 wheels, which is kind of the majority of the build. I think everything after this are all the kind of little kind of mopping up bits. I've still got to build the paddock stand. Still got to do, like the camera mount for the rear, some little external pieces, a few decals for fasteners and stuff on the bodywork, polish the bodywork as well because that's not been touched since it was 2K'd. Yeah, so lots of little things like that will be in the next part. However, let's bring it right back to part 5 because that's what you're here for. So if you are new to the channel, please subscribe. Please drop a like as well if you like the video. If the videos get to 50 likes, that's really good for the channel. That helps get it onto the recommended list for non-subscribers. So based on their interests, this will suddenly appear as a recommended video. So if we can get to 50 likes, that'd be amazing. If you're already a subscriber, of course, don't forget to like as well. And for everyone out there, feel free to comment should you wish. So that's me rambled probably enough. It's a reasonable amount of content, so I'm not going to hang about too long. Let's dive straight on over onto the bench and get cracking on this part of the video build series. So I'll come back at the end with some final thoughts about what's going on. So see you in a bit. So thank you for the mighty fine introduction, me that faces the camera. So let's dive straight in. So I said in the intro we're going to cover exhausts, and that's exactly where we're going to start. So usual steps: get all the necessary bits off of the sprue, clean up them sprue gates using some UMP thinny sticks. I'll be honest, there's not much seam lines on these parts. There is a little bit, but they're really easy to clean up. A couple of swipes of a thinny stick, run over it with a buffer as well, and they're absolutely spot on. And before you know it, you're on to actually gluing the exhaust parts together. Now, you could easily paint these separately, but then obviously you'll have seam lines to deal with from the glued parts. So it is best to glue the entire exhaust system together, which I think is like a kind of 4:2 type system. I don't think it goes 4:1. Oh, actually, it is. I think it is 4:1:2 type system. But there is going to be a couple of seam lines from where those parts join together. Does create some awkward angles for painting, but that's probably lesser of two evils compared to painting parts before they're assembled like this, because you will end up with some nasty seam lines, which you'll then have to either go and address or leave them as seam lines. If you go and address them, then you're respraying anyway. So however, so that's the bulk of the exhaust. There's a couple of end pieces which go on as well. So again, they'll get clipped off the sprue and a sprue attachment points cleared up. In this case, just using a very sharp scalpel blade. Once they're nicely cleaned up, those parts can be easily attached with some Tamiya Extra Thin. A little bit of a squeeze and they'll be absolutely fine. Give them a couple of hours to set, and then you can go back and clean up the remainder of any seam lines from the glued parts. So just making sure they are firmly attached together. And that is a very nice exhaust system. Now, there's a couple of other smaller parts which go with the exhaust. I guess like a foot shield, so that needs to be clipped off as well, and the end pieces as well. So as we're going to end up priming the exhaust system in black, it's worth getting all the radiator parts off as well, because pretty much all the radiator parts are going to be in a metallic color, so all of them are going to get primed black as well. So yeah, just work your way through the kind of parts from the instructions, clipping off the parts as you go, collecting them all together, and get them all cleaned up. So the exhaust itself has had some curing time, so it's time to go back and clean up the glue joins with some UMP thinny sticks and a sponge sander as well, and then go back over with the buffer, and you should get a nice finish on those seams. Now, I do end up later having a bit of an issue where there's an obvious seam line after the painting's been done. Probably at the point at which I noticed it was probably a bit too late to deal with it. So I've just kind of left it. Sometimes you just have to live with some of these things. So I'm going to cover the front forks as well. So that is another bunch of parts that can be removed from the sprue. Same process as with everything else. Clean them off the sprue, clean up the attachment points, clean up any noticeable seam lines. There is a variety of parts that go with these assemblies. Basically the pistons for the brakes. The pistons, more like a kind of accumulator type device, I think. Then there's the actual fork attachments. I'm going to cover the brake discs as well, because obviously the front brake discs will go on the end of the front forks. So the discs come in a couple of different pieces as well. So we'll get all of them off the sprue, get them all cleaned up. And basically, as you can see at the top of the screen, I've got little pots full of plastic bits. All of these will be cleaned up. All of them will have to get mounted onto various attachments. And then a massive priming session. So pretty much everything here is going to get primed in UMP black. Because nearly everything is either going to be in a semi-gloss black finish or in a metallic finish, or we'll get some kind of decal coating on it as well. So some parts will clean up with sanders, some parts is easier to use a sharp knife blade. But overall, just a patient, methodical approach, get everything off the sprue, work your way through it. Basically, when they're all cleaned up and ready to go, they'll get popped in a pot. Then we'll have all the parts kind of removed and cleaned up. We'll get to the stage where I can mount them on a variety of different items. Whether it's a crocodile clip like this. However, once attached, they realize it's not the most secure. So I decide to go for a cocktail stick instead, which seems a little bit more secure. There's also a little bit of blue tack used. Some coffee stirrers, as you can see on the left hand side, there's a selection of coffee stirrers available. So blue tack works for parts like this. And then for a whole lot of other parts, just use some double-sided tape, also on the coffee stirrers. Now the double-sided tape I'm using, I think came from Hobbycraft. And I will say it's incredibly sticky and it works brilliantly for mounting parts like this. So basically I'm looking for, a good kind of flat gluing surface. Can basically place that down on the double-sided tape and then everything can get sprayed as a bunch of parts on either one or multiple coffee sticks. I mean, if they're all going to be painted the same color, it's just as easy to get as many parts on one coffee stirrer as it is on multiples. And for some parts like the radiator, it's just easy just to drill a little hole. That's probably a less than a 1 mil drill bit. Drill it in an inconspicuous place and then pop a cocktail stick in the hole, and that's securely attached. So as you can see, there's an entire mass of parts which are all kind of done and ready to go for priming. So UMP Black is the primer of choice for pretty much all these parts. It's a fairly standard process that you've seen in most of the parts, certainly of this video build series so far. So I'm not going to dwell on this too long. As I said before, my general approach is the first coat is quite a light, dusty coat. Then build a little bit more on the second coat and go a little bit heavier probably on the final coat. To be honest, there's no need to do full wet coats with the UMP primer. Although saying that, with the black primer, sometimes you can pretty much hose it on if you want to. It's a pretty good and reliable acrylic primer. So the top of the fork, the triple trees, they are getting primed in white. Basically because I've got the two reservoirs which are going to be in white. So it's easier to get them in white first. I can mask them off and then paint in semi-gloss black and any metallic colours as necessary. So once the primer's had plenty of curing time, it's time to start spraying the exhaust a metallic colour. So X32 titanium silver is the colour I've chosen. I think the call out calls for the LP equivalent, but I don't have that. So I've gone for the X variety in this instance, which is still a pretty good finish and a pretty good paint. So there is going to be more work on the exhaust a little bit later. However, while the titanium silver is curing, it's on to the radiator parts. Now the radiator itself is done in LP11, which I did have the LP in this case, so I've gone with that. A lot of the attachment pieces are also kind of base coat of LP11, although there's some other metallics will get picked out via brush a little bit later. But as is the usual process, a couple of coats of LP11 goes down fine over the acrylic UMP black primer. Probably about 3 coats given to all these components. So the exhaust itself has got masked up. There's a couple of sections of the exhaust which are in LP20 and was it XF56? I think I've gone with XF56 in this case. Yeah, possibly. Now, unfortunately, because I'm an idiot and I've changed my camera position, most of the kind of detail painting is actually off camera and was not very visible. However, the exhausts have been basically treated to a little bit of alclad hot metals. I think I've used the sepia and the hot purple or hot blue. But certainly there's quite a lot of sepia used. The ends of the exhaust are also given a little bit of sepia as well. That gives that kind of brown stained color. So this is pretty much the final result. So I've kept it quite subtle, looking at reference pictures of this 2021 bike. It's definitely subtle coloration on the exhaust as far as I can see. So I've kept it quite muted. So not a huge amount of discoloration added. And for me, into my eye, that looks the part. So you can see here where I've added the ends of the exhausts. The edges are not quite right. The color doesn't quite blend with the rest of the exhaust. So I'll probably go back and do a little bit of touch-up work on the exhaust. Maybe with brush paint. I'll see how it looks when we get to the final assembly. Probably, as you'll see with the amount of assembly that's been done, those exhausts are not coming off. So it's probably not going to be airbrushable. Just one of those things I'm going to have to live with. Suck it up, basically. So yeah, so a little bit of brush painting now around the various attachments to the radiator. So they were done in basically a base of LP11. Various call outs using, is that, let me just have a look on the shelf. So it's probably XF84 dark iron. There's definitely a little bit of X11, some flat black as well. Basically just kind of detail painting the hose attachments. You could mask them up, but I think for the amount of time that you mask up, I think the result I get with a brush is as good as I want anyway, and it's certainly good enough in this scale. It looks all right to my eye. That being said, I've probably got dodgy eyes anyway, so. So once again, I've just decanted a little bit of the paint onto some clear acetate and using a fine detail brush from the Army Painter series, which I do find are very good brushes for brush painting with. So it's just a case of carefully working your way around the particular part that you're trying to paint. I tend to work at the edges first, just to get that kind of outline done, and then fill in the remainder. So now I'm going back to, one of my brush paint sets of choice, which are the Revell Aqua Acrylics. I do find them a very good brush paint to work with. In this case, I think I'm using, I think it's number 91, which is steel. It's not quite as dark as XF56, but is quite a nice dark kind of metallic grey color. And again, just putting a little bit down on a bit of clear acetate, drop of water, just helps thin it a little bit, helps it flow a little bit better than straight out of the pot, because they are quite thick paints. But when thinned appropriately, they brush fantastically, and they airbrush fantastically as well, especially when thinned with UMP acrylic thinners. And I'll be honest, they're good value for money as well. I think in the UK, they're normally about £2 a pot, I think. And you get about 18 mil of paint for that, which I just think is good value for money as well. And I like the results I get from them. So again, it's just a case of working your way around, picking out the appropriate details in various colors. I have kind of gone with a general scheme as suggested by the instructions. There's not a huge amount of detailed pictures available of these bikes without the fairings on, because most of it is kind of secret squirrel stuff. So, and to be honest, the fairings are going to be on my bike. They're probably never going to come off again. So most of this is not going to be visible. So at the top of the radiator, there is a cap, and that's painted in black. And then there is a decal to go on the top of it as well. So the decal is just cut off the sheet, and just a drop of water on the cutting mat is enough to release it from its backing paper. If it's got a little bit of a clear edge that overlaps a little bit, once it's set for a couple of minutes, just hit it with some decal solution. With these decals, probably UMP strong is probably good enough just to sit them down and get any edges to conform around if necessary. So, with all that detail painting done, some of the radiator can now get assembled. So the kind of main upper sides of the radiator can be added, and that's got the kind of main kind of in and out hoses for the rad itself, and the cap on that particular side. And then of course, once that's done, that's when of course you spot that you've missed painting some other little bits. So there is a mixture of clear red and clear blue to give kind of a clear purple color on some of the parts. So when that's done, we can carry on then with the assembly. It's the usual case when you get to this stage, you start assembling bits and realize you've kind of missed a particular little color call out or a little bit of detail that just needs to be picked out. So with some of the radiator parts assembled, it's kind of now I realize that, well, actually, I probably need to get the exhaust on before I can mount the radiator. And to be honest, if I'm going to put the exhaust on, I might as well get the rear swing arm in as well. There is clearance between them, but just to make the assembly a little bit easier, I just decide, well, let's get the swing arm in place. That's one step then done. And of course, it gives you that kind of visual kind of level of completeness of the bike as well. That kind of build up to beginning to look like a motorcycle. So a bit of careful maneuvering, get that swing arm into place, get it all lined up. And then it's one of the larger screws. Just check the call outs for the dimensions. On the Tamiya instructions, of course, the screws are actually shown 1-to-1 scale. So it's often easy just to kind of pop your screw up against the reference pick and you'll know if you've got the right size one. And then on the underside of the swing arm, there's another smaller screw, which just gives it that kind of fixed position. So with the swing arm in place, the exhaust can be added. So a couple of super glue points just at the exhaust outlets on the engine itself. And then a little bit of careful maneuvering just to make sure that you don't scratch the exhaust now that you've painted it all up. But of course, just some careful maneuvering to make sure everything is in place correctly. So there's a little bit of maneuvering just to get it lined up. Obviously failed in my first attempt, but now I seem to have it spot on. So there is clearance between the swing arm and the exhaust, but there's not very much. So it just seemed easier just to get the swing arm in, get the exhaust on. Then just make sure the top of those exhausts is securely in the exhaust ports on the engine. So once that's in place, the radiator can now be added. It's that kind of clips on either side of the top of the frame. And then there is a attachment point off the support that was glued on to the bottom of the radiator. And that's the kind of main 3 attachment points for the radiator. There is then some additional hoses which will get fitted along the side, which will securely mount to the engine as well. But what I will say is that the fit is absolutely perfect. This is the kind of place where you could very easily have a little bit of misalignment in a lot of kits. But that radiator is perfectly aligned to the engine. And this part that goes on the side of the radiator fits perfectly. And the hose end just slots into its locating recess perfectly. Spot on fit there from Tamiya, as you would kind of expect at this stage. So with that all done, there's a number of bits that were just left in UMP black primer. So they've got some carbon fiber details to go on them. To be honest, I probably should have done these off the bike. Kind of rushed ahead, glued them on, and then realized, oh, actually, hang on, these are probably in carbon fiber. But then looking at the parts, it was just as easy to do the carbon fiber with them in place. So they've been nicely set in the correct location, and then they'll get hit with some UMP strong solution, which will allow them to conform absolutely perfectly. Yeah, I'm just going straight for the UMP strong in this case. So the usual kind of process with decals, a little bit of warm water off screen, let them sit in that for 10 seconds, they'll release easily, and then hit them with some UMP strong once they're settled in place. And then there's even more carbon bits on this side of the engine as well. And they've gone into place absolutely perfectly. Even with the parts already being fitted to the bike, actually they went on pretty smoothly, so that was not a problem, despite being probably an oversight on my part. So a little bit of excess just to mop up. Kind of get that decal nicely pressed down in place, and then of course you can hit it with your decal solutions as required. So there is a couple more pieces on the side of that engine. So these pieces go on the kind of upper and lower surfaces of the part that's already fitted. These were a little bit more of a squeeze to get in because you've got to kind of slide the decal in past some of the engine parts. But again, not too difficult to overcome with a little bit of patience and a little bit of fine tweezering work. So very fine tweezer skills are one of those things that just time and practice, you get them spot on. Except with PE parts, they tend to go ping very, very easily. So now that all the exhaust and radiator is done, we can go back to the forks. The forks, of course, were primed earlier with everything else. To the top part of the forks, they've got carbon decals for them. So it's really just the bottom end where it is basically a combination of three metallic colors. So we're going to start from the top, mask off the bottom part where the carbon fiber will be. So the first part of that is going to be in gold from recollection. I'm sure that's right. Masking is not entirely necessary for this first bit because, of course, you know, the top of the fork stanchions are going to be in carbon fiber anyway. But there are some bits which will stay in semi-gloss black, so you might as well just mask it up. Just makes it a little bit easier and neater. So they've been over to the spray booth. They've been sprayed in gold. So once the gold is time to dry, basically they're then coated in clear orange. So once clear orange has been done, that's had a chance to dry. We can now mask off that part, and then it's kind of the main oleo part of the forks that's going to be painted next. So they're going to be done in silver. Can't remember which silver I used. There we go, painted in silver. That's going to then get coated in clear yellow, just like that, and that gives it that kind of anodized metallic look. And then those parts get masked up, and then the very bottom end, which is basically the brake blocks and the kind of main hubs for the wheels, they all get painted in titanium silver, along with the calipers themselves as well. So once the paint's had a chance to cure, as I said earlier, there is some carbon fiber which goes around the actual stanchions of the forks themselves. So these are all cut to size already. These are perfectly sized, so they will fit between the basically raised sections of the fork legs themselves. So it's basically two carbon decals on each fork. So just get them lined up as straight as possible, carefully wrap them around. They will definitely meet, they overlap by plenty. And then I'm just twisting it just a little bit just to make sure that the seam is kind of away from the visible kind of part of the fork. I think I've tried to make it so that the seam sits on the inside. And then there's a thinner strip of carbon that goes on the top of the fork legs. And that is basically the forks completed. So we've done the forks. It's now time to address the brakes. So again, they've been primed in UMP black. The main part of the disc, that's been given a coat of Vallejo Model Air black metallic. which I think gives it a kind of good kind of carbony kind of look. Then on the brake disc itself, there's basically an inner ring which is going to be done XF56. So I'm just using basically a circle cutter to cut out some masking tape circles. So just careful measurement of the diameter you want. Carefully spin your cutter around the masking tape and line it up with exactly where you want it on the disc itself. So that will happily protect the darker, we'll call it the carbon color that I've tried to recreate using some metallic black. We've done for both discs. Off to the spray booth, sprayed with XF56. We're back, peel off the masking tape, and there's pretty much a perfect demarcation line there. So really pleased with that, and they look the part. So the inner parts of the brake discs were painted in dark iron, and then there's a small sensor ring as well, which is probably kind of a speed sensor. So that's been done in X32, I believe, if I recall correctly. So once all those parts have had a chance to cure, time to get in with the CA glue once again and begin assembly of those. So there's a couple of smaller pieces that go in first. So it's basically two little pins which go on the outside. I think they're basically where the front hugger sits. So a little dab of CA glue, pop them in place. And then there's the addition of the, I guess they're a brake reservoir of some sort. So then there's the bottom part of the triple trees. So again, it's got little cutouts for them, and there is a little locating pin as well. A little bit of CA glue, get those parts together so they line up pretty well. Probably angled a little bit slightly out, but fitting the wheel will actually correct that. But before we can fit the wheel, we need to put the discs on. So there's that inner speed sensor ring. I'm assuming it's a speed sensor of some sort. So that ring goes on first. And then the main disc attaches to that kind of center of the disc. So those parts can then be CA glued to the wheel itself, which was of course completed in part 4 when the rear swing arm and rear wheel were done. There is locating points as well on each of the brake discs as well. So just make sure you get that in the right spot. And with that done, we can then look at fitting this front wheel and discs to front forks. So usual for Tamiya bikes, there's one of the large screws goes through the center, and then that can be screwed in place. Just like so. Now the front hugger itself, you could glue it in place, but I found that it actually seemed to actually snap into place quite well. Seems reasonably secure. A little bit of force on the forks just to get the locating points to pop into the recesses that are there. But it seems to work out just fine for the forks. Yeah, there we go. They just pop in place like that. So that front fender, front mudguard, front hugger, whatever you want to call it, is not glued in place. Just held in with with the force from the little fitting pins, locating pins. Wow, struggling for words today. With that done, we can then assemble the top of the triple trees and then use one of the other longer screws to fit the front forks onto the frame itself. Yep, that's in place. Happy with that. So there then is, of course, a steering damper needs to be fitted as well. So it's easier to fit this now before the actual hand grips are in place. So there's a couple of small screws for that. They are fiddly as hell. They always are. But you don't want them too tight because it'll just bend the shaft of the steering damper. So you want them tight enough so that it's not flopping about, but then not too tight that it makes it bend. So on the hand grips, there's a couple of buttons which have individual callouts for different colors. I think there's a mixture of blue, red, yellow, dark green. So just using a micro brush just to dab that in place. Buttons themselves are actually quite big and well defined, so an easy little job with a micro brush. And we've worked our way through the blue, red and yellow and onto the final button, which is in green. Once that part is complete, there then is some carbon fibering, of course. Of course there is on this. So the guard that goes on the brake lever, so that's to kind of stop the brake lever from being pressed if you hit another rider. So that guard is in carbon fiber. It's made up of 4 individual pieces. They are absolutely tiny, very thin pieces, but they are cut perfectly to shape, so they actually fit pretty well. So it's the usual process. In hot water, get the decals on, and a little bit of UMP strong just to settle them in place. So once that's all done and is set for a bit, these hand controls, handlebars can basically be completed. The clip-ons can be completed. So obviously there's the clutch on the left-hand side. Interestingly enough, on most MotoGP, on pretty much all MotoGP bikes, I think the clutch is only used once, which is for a start. After that, pretty much every gear change is just done without the clutch. Interesting fact, that. There we go. So both sides can be done. Carbon fiber decals are probably still setting a little bit. They're not done too long ago, but they're nicely in position. So just be careful if the decals are not completely set. But at that stage, we are pretty much all happy with what we've done. So we've covered the exhaust, we've done the radiator, and we've done the front forks. So let's head back to me for final thoughts. So there we go. That's part 5 done and dusted. A few little things I think probably could have been better. There's a bit of a seam line that's popped out on the exhaust, which I didn't really spot when I was doing it. I blame dodgy eyesight, possibly. There's probably a little bit of touch-up paintwork around the edge of the exhaust end tips. I was trying to kind of blend the colour a little bit. I didn't want it going kind of. I don't know. I don't know what I was trying to do. Whatever I was trying to do didn't quite work, and it looks mismatched compared to the rest of the exhaust. So it's not quite what I wanted to achieve. Probably go back and brush, touch up that a little bit later. But in the next part, that is. Radiator assembly, yeah, again, there's a few little bits and pieces are not quite as ideal as I want them. I still need to go back and do a wash on that. Front end, I'm reasonably happy with. With a fork set, there's only so much you can do with getting that real metallic kind of feel to some of the parts on it, particularly on the kind of oleo part of the fork itself. But I think they look quite good in that kind of silver coated with clear yellow. Gives them that reasonably good anodized look, so I think they'll look okay once they're on the shelf in a dark corner. No, once it's completed and on the shelf, I think it looks okay. So yeah, so all in all, really happy with the progress. And kind of that sense the end is kind of coming to the series, so I think part 6 will be the final part. I think for the actual build itself, it feels like it's progressing towards the end, so I'm hopeful in the next probably week, 2 weeks, I should get to the finish on that. So yeah, so I'm happy with the progress to date. So yeah, as a final reminder, of course, if you're not a subscriber and you're new here, please subscribe. Please drop a like on the video. Of course, if you are a subscriber, also please like the video. And everybody feel free to leave a comment should you wish. So yeah, so thank you all for watching. Thank you for sticking with me for whatever this is, 36, 37 minutes, I think. If I can do mental arithmetic, which I probably can't. So scratch that. But yeah, so reasonably good length video. Not too long, but kind of over the 30-minute mark. So, you know, definite commitment for those that sit through all of this and listen to me. So yeah, so thank you everybody, and well, I'll see you in part 6, which will hopefully come around very, very quickly, and that'll then be a wrap on the video build series. So yeah, so thank you for sharing the journey so far. So we'll see you all very, very soon. Thanks for watching, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.